The year stands at 479 BCE. Along a coastline near Salamis, waves drag at scorched timber and shattered armor. The shore itself has turned black. Ash mixed with sand, indistinguishable now. The air carries salt, carries smoke. And beneath it all, something metallic, copper, wrong. Xerxes' armada lies destroyed. Hulls burned to nothing, formations broken, the fleet reduced to driftwood and memory. Centuries from now, poets will frame this as triumph, as divine intervention, as proof that Greece could not fall. They will chisel it into stone. They will sing it at every gathering. They will make it immortal, but here, in this exact moment, there is a sound echoing from the hills, a sound no epic will ever transcribe, screaming. Not the screaming of combat, not the noise born from courage or bloodlust or the certainty of a warrior's end. This is something else entirely. High, raw, scraped from throats until only breath and panic remain, and the slow realization that rescue will never come. It emerges from a sprawling encampment stretching miles along the coast. Row after row of canvas shelters, thousands of them, rippling in the wind like the sails of ships that no longer exist. These are not quarters for soldiers. These are containment zones. And inside them are the spoils, not treasure, not territory, women, daughters pulled from Athens, from Corinth, from Thebes, from Megara, girls who witnessed their fathers cut down in alleyways, mothers who concealed children inside cisterns, inside wells, inside storage jars, praying suffocation would come quietly before discovery, women who believed the worst horror was watching their cities collapse into flame. They were mistaken. Because they survived, and what Xerxes orchestrated in the months after, what his commanders systematically imposed, was not mercy. It was not mere cruelty. It was something the ancient world had terminology for, something modern historians soften into words like enslavement. But that term fails to capture what truly occurred. What befell these women, documented in Persian administrative clay, recorded in Greek testimony, traced in skeletal remains unearthed near Sardis, was deliberate, calculated, engineered not merely to punish Greece, but to hollow it from within, to erase it through its daughters. The question is not whether you can endure this truth. The question is whether you are willing to remember what they endured, while the world around them celebrated Greek victory. If you have ever questioned why certain histories are narrated through the perspective of men on battlefields, and not the women abandoned in the ruins, you are where you need to be. Here on Crimson Historians, we excavate the archives the world discarded, the tablets buried beneath palace floors, the mass graves no one acknowledges, the single-line testimonies carved by hands that understood they would be forgotten. Before we continue, if you are drawn to evidence like this, to accounts deliberately excluded from the narrative, subscribe to Grimoryx. Every engagement, every share, every subscription allows us to uncover more of what was intentionally erased. Return with me now to that coastline. What followed challenges every sanitized version your education provided. The tragedy of Hellas' daughters cannot be understood without dissecting the mechanism that consumed them. Xerxes I was not simply a monarch. He was the living embodiment of an empire stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, an empire that conquered not through force alone, but through a system so efficient, so deeply woven into Persian infrastructure, it functioned as a parallel government. It was known as the harem system, but that phrase distorts what it truly represented. This was not about indulgence, not about luxury, not about silk or fantasy or the corrupted imagery that would later obscure our understanding. It was about dominance, about seizing the daughters of enemies and converting them into symbols of submission, about breeding a generation of hybrid administrators whose loyalty belonged to Persia, not to the lands from which their mothers had been stolen. When Xerxes launched his invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, he brought 500,000 soldiers, but he also brought something else: slavers, scribes, officials whose function was not combat, but documentation. Their task was to catalog every fallen city, every surrendered island, every resisting village reduced to ash. They recorded it all: who survived, who perished, and most critically, who could be taken. The girls were prioritized. Not because the Persians possessed unique cruelty, many empires practiced this, but because Xerxes grasped something most conquerors missed. You do not defeat a people by killing their men. You defeat them by taking their daughters. Ensuring the next generation grows up speaking your language, worshiping your gods, forgetting their mothers ever belonged to another world. By the time Persian forces withdrew after Salamis and Plataea, over 40,000 Greek women and children had been absorbed into the Persian administrative network. 40,000. Most were transported east to Sardis, to Susa, to Persepolis. Some were assigned to estates as domestic labor. Others, particularly the young, the beautiful, the daughters of noble lineage, were integrated into the royal harem apparatus, not for what you imagine, for assimilation. If this moment in history fails to compel you toward understanding, you may be missing the lesson our ancestors died attempting to preserve: that the most dangerous action an empire can take is not killing you. It is making you forget who you were. The shore at Phaleron, just south of Athens. Summer 479 BCE. Persian forces are withdrawing, but not empty-handed. Greek civilians, those unable to flee, those too elderly or too young or too defiant to run, are being processed. That is the term the Persians employed: processed, like grain, like lumber. Like cargo, overseeing the operation is a man named Artabazos, a Persian general whose name appears in Herodotus, whose seal has been recovered from Persepolis ruins. He is not watching the battlefield, he is watching the harvest. That was their term, bar girifton, the taking of yield. Women are separated first, then sorted by age. Girls under 12 sent to one group. They'll be raised as servants, taught Persian, integrated slowly over years until Greek words for mother and home feel foreign in their mouths. Women over 30 sent to labor camps in Thrace, in Phrygia. Places where life expectancy is measured in seasons, not years, but the ones in between, the ones aged 13 to 25. Those are the ones Artabazos examines personally. A girl is pulled from the line, from Megara, perhaps 16. Her hair matted with dust and brine, her tunic torn at the shoulder. She does not resist, not because she is compliant, but because she has already learned what resistance costs. Her mother screams anyway. A Persian soldier strikes her across the face, hard enough to drop her to her knees, but he doesn't kill her. They need her alive to watch, because that's part of the system too. You don't just take the daughters, you make the mothers understand that resistance is pointless, that even their daughters' bodies belong to the empire now. The girl from Megara is led to a tent. Inside, there's a scribe Persian seated at a low table with clay tablets and a stylus. He doesn't look at her face, he looks at her teeth, her hands, the way she stands. He's recording details: age, height, condition of teeth, presence of scars, evidence of virginity. These aren't soldiers, they're administrators. This is a bureaucracy. An intact seal from Persepolis, translated in the 1930s by archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld, includes a line that reads, "Delivered to Susa 120 Greek females ages 14 to 22, sorted and prepared for royal service, from Athens, Thebes, and Corinth. Condition acceptable. Condition acceptable." That's how the Persian Empire categorized the daughters of Hellas, as inventory, but here is where it deepens. Because what followed was not random brutality, it was policy. The girls selected for harem integration were loaded onto ships bound east, but not all of them immediately. Some were detained, held in coastal camps throughout Asia Minor for weeks, sometimes months. Why? Because the Persians had learned something from prior conquests. If you seize a woman and place her directly into service, she resists. She remembers. She clings to hope that someone will ransom her, that her city will negotiate, that the gods will intervene. But if you break her first, If you strip away her name, her language, her sense of self, then integration proceeds smoothly. And the most effective method of breaking someone is not violence. It is humiliation, forcing them to participate in their own erasure. There exists an account fragmentary preserved in a collection of 4th century BCE Greek epitaphs. A woman named Clays from Corinth. She was 13 when the Persians took her. She survived. Decades later, she returned to Greece as an elderly woman and left an inscription at a temple near Olympia. It reads, "I was Clays, daughter of Nicodemus. They took me in the year of the fire. They gave me a new name I will not speak. I served in the house of the king's cousin for 16 years. When they freed me, I had forgotten the hymns my mother taught me. I have come here to remember. This stone will remember for me. 16 years, she was 29 when freed. And she had forgotten the hymns. That is not enslavement, that is cultural annihilation. The camps where these women were detained were not prisons, they were re-education facilities. Girls were taught Persian, how to bow in the Persian manner, how to prepare Persian cuisine, wear Persian dress, adopt Persian gestures. Those who resisted were starved. Those who complied received marginally better treatment, and those who resisted too much. There's a mass grave near Sardis excavated in 1958. It contains remains of over 300 women dated to the early 5th century BCE. The bones exhibit signs of malnutrition. Blunt force trauma, evidence of systematic abuse. Archaeologists noted something peculiar. Almost all of the skulls faced west, as if even in death they were attempting to go home. By late 479 BCE, the first wave of Greek captives reaches Susa, the administrative heart of the Persian Empire. The city is vast, glittering, impossibly alien to a girl from a Greek village. Columned halls rise higher than any Athenian temple. Gardens bloom with flowers that have no Greek names. The air smells of incense, of cardamom, of something sweet she cannot identify. And at the center stands the palace complex, where the royal harem resides. This is where myth collides with horror. The word harem conjures imagery from Hollywood, veils, incense, opulence, but Persia's royal harem was not a brothel, it was a political institution. A facility where daughters of conquered peoples were transformed into imperial assets. According to the Persepolis fortification tablets, administrative documents preserved because they were baked in a fire when Alexander the Great burned the city in 330 BCE. Women entering the harem system were divided into hierarchical ranks. At the bottom, domestic servants. Above them, concubines. At the top, those selected to bear children for Persian nobility. The objective was not pleasure, it was integration. Children born to Greek mothers and Persian fathers would be raised Persian, but with enough Greek heritage to serve as intermediaries, translators, administrators in newly conquered territories. It was genetic colonialism, but not every girl progressed that far. A girl named Thalia, her name preserved in a Babylonian administrative tablet from 477 BCE. She was 15 when she arrived at Susa. The tablet records that she refused integration and was assigned to a disciplinary unit. What that meant is detailed in another document: forced labor in palace weaving rooms, 14 hours daily, minimal rations, no contact with other Greek women. She lasted 8 months. Cause of death recorded as exhaustion. But some girls survived the integration process. And what became of them is, in certain respects, worse than death, because they became complicit. There exists a letter, an actual letter, preserved in the arid sands of Egypt and translated in the 1970s, from a woman named Roxane, a Greek name. It means bright. She's writing to her sister in Thessaly. The letter dates to approximately 470 BCE. She writes, "I am well, I have learned the language, I have learned the prayers. The king's steward has taken me as a secondary wife. I have given him a son. He is beautiful, he has your eyes, but he will never know your name. Please do not try to find me. I am not who I was. I am not who I was. That is the sentence that should haunt you, because Roxane survived. She was fed, clothed. Elevated in status, she bore a child, and in exchange, she birthed a son who would grow up Persian, who would never know his mother once prayed to Athena, who would never hear the lullabies she learned as a girl in Thessaly. This was the true strategy. Not massacre. Massacre creates martyrs. Songs are written, stories endure. The dead become immortal, but assimilation. Slow, methodical, bureaucratic, taking enemy daughters and converting them into mothers of your next generation of administrators. And it worked. By the mid-5th century BCE, thousands of mixed Greek-Persian children were serving in Achaemenid administration. Some became scribes, some became soldiers, some governed the very territories their mothers once called home. Xerxes did not merely invade Greece. He attempted to absorb it, if you are still watching. It is because some part of you recognizes this story must be told. Subscribe to Grimoryx. Not for us, for them, for the girls whose names were erased, for the mothers who watched their daughters taken east and never saw them again. This is their testimony. And it survives only if we refuse to let it be forgotten. Not all remained in Persia. Some very few, but some returned. In the decades following the Persian Wars, as Greek city-states consolidated power and Persia's grip on the Aegean weakened, a trickle of women began coming home. Freed by sympathetic owners, ransomed by desperate families, or in rare cases, escaped, but when they returned, they discovered home no longer existed. There is an inscription from Eretria dated to around 460 BCE that narrates a story modern historians rarely address. A woman named Harmonia returned after 12 years in Persian captivity. She was 28. She had a child with her, a boy, half Persian, perhaps 6 years old. The city of Eretria refused to recognize her citizenship. Her family refused to accept her. The reason, recorded bluntly in civic legal archives, she had been defiled by barbarian touch and born a child of mixed blood. To accept her would be to accept the enemy. She and her son were turned away. The inscription ends there. We do not know what became of them. This is the fragment of the story that does not fit the heroic narrative, because Greece won the war. Athens became the heart of democracy, philosophy, art. The Persian threat was repelled. Poets composed epics. Sculptors carved marble, and no one wished to discuss the daughters who returned broken, or the ones who never returned at all. A historian named Theopompus, writing in the 4th century BCE, made a passing reference to the silent women. Greek survivors of Persian captivity who existed on society's margins, unable to reintegrate, unable to speak of what had been done. He wrote, "They are like shadows. They move through the agora, but no one sees them. They were taken, and though they returned, they are still gone. The silent women, that's what Greece called them, and then over time, they stopped calling them anything at all." By the time Herodotus composed his histories in the 430s BCE, focus had shifted entirely to battles, strategies, the glory of Greek resistance. He mentions Persian captives once. A single line, many Greeks were taken, but in time some returned. Some returned, that's it, that's all he gave them. Some returned, that's all he granted them, but the graves do not lie. Across Greece, especially in regions subjected to heavy Persian occupation, archaeologists have uncovered burial sites from the mid-5th century BCE containing women's remains with unusual characteristics. Signs of malnutrition consistent with prolonged captivity, skeletal trauma, and in several cases, evidence of childbirth at extremely young ages. One such grave near ancient Thebes contained the skeleton of a woman in her early 20s. Beside her, a small clay tablet inscribed in Greek. It reads, "I am daughter of no one, I am mother of no one. I am the forgotten, let this mark that I was. No name, only that, so why does this story matter? Because it is not about Xerxes, it is not even about Persia. It is about what happens when empires decide the most effective weapon is not the sword. It is silence. Xerxes invaded Greece and lost. His fleet burned at Salamis. His army was crushed at Plataea. By every military measure, Greece won. But if you measure victory differently, if you count the daughters taken, the identities erased, the mothers who spent the remainder of their lives staring toward the eastern horizon, then the question becomes far more difficult to answer. Because those women did not die gloriously. They did not become martyrs. Most simply disappeared into the administrative machinery of an empire, were given new names, bore children who grew up Persian, faded from Greek memory entirely, and Greece allowed it. Because remembering them would have required admitting that victory carried a cost that could not be carved into marble or sung in epic verse. It would have meant confronting the reality that empires do not merely conquer land. They conquer bloodlines, languages, futures. The philosopher Plutarch, writing centuries later, said something that lingers. We remember the battles, we name the generals. We build temples to the gods who granted us victory. But the price of war is always paid by those we do not name. The daughters of Hellas paid that price, not with their deaths but with their erasure. And here is what should terrify you. This strategy succeeded. Within 2 generations, the mixed-blood descendants of Greek captives were serving in Persian courts, governing Persian territories, speaking Persian fluently. The cultural erasure Xerxes initiated did not end with his death. It rippled forward for decades, quietly, bureaucratically, until the line between conqueror and conquered blurred beyond recognition. That is what occurs when you fail to tell the stories of the women left behind. They do not merely disappear from history. They disappear from existence, but not completely, because here we are, 2,500 years later, reading clay tablets from Persepolis, translating inscriptions from forgotten graves, finding the single-line testimonies of women who carved their anguish into stone, and because they knew, somehow they knew. That silence was the final death. And as long as we continue reading, continue translating, continue refusing to allow their voices to be swallowed by time, they are still here, not in the way they wanted, not in the way they deserved, but here. You have just witnessed one of history's darkest truths, not the kind inscribed in textbooks, but the kind buried in administrative records and anonymous graves. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily voices can be erased when no one fights to remember them, and then subscribe to Grimoryx and keep the past alive, because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced 2,500 years ago, especially then.